A few more people join in. So welcome back, everybody, to another Open Game Data Open Office Hours. So as a reminder, the Open Game Data community is an NSF-funded research incubator, bringing together a collective of researchers interested in the use of data generated in and around games to advance scientific understanding of thinking, learning, and decision-making. We have two primary goals. One is to compile a set of best practices and resources and how to do data-based methods in games, but then ultimately our goal will be to build some concrete research infrastructure to support database research methods in games. A bunch of resources that already exist. So the Open Game Data website hosted by Field Day Labs at the University of Wisconsin is a great example of the kind of thing we're trying to build. We have a Slack group where we communicate and share resources. And then we have these open office hour sessions that you're attending right now. And so the way these sessions work generally is they're inspired by a set of sessions that used to be held by the Statistical Education Research Group at CMU, where a student or a postdoc or somebody would work with the statistics faculty kind of as if it was an office hour, but kind of doing it publicly. And so you would learn a lot of really interesting stuff about how experts thought through problems and worked through things just by watching some experts sort of dialogue over how to solve problems together. Some things to keep in mind: presenters are often showing their work publicly or in progress publicly, and this can take some courage and consideration that some of these things aren't necessarily always fully done or developed. Our goal here is to help the presenter achieve their goal and move their work forward, but also these sessions are intended as a learning experience for everybody involved. So if anybody mentions a concept you don't understand, feel free to raise your hand, ask a question for clarification, or if you have any ideas or suggestions for the presenter, you can also feel free to chime in. And with that, I'll hand off to the presenter, who is me this week. And talking about an issue I was kind of running into trying to work with Open Game Data, the specific software as it exists right now from the Field Day team, and hitting on some nuances we were running into with a game that I've been working on. Let me see if I can I'll stop share quickly and marshal some windows around, but yeah, I really need to pre-record that thing. It's like basically a podcast intro at this point. Let's see here. What's the best way to show this off? So I've shown this game a little bit before. And I can go a bit into the context behind it. This is one of those cases where this game is not really about learning, but it's definitely about sort of human decision making and such. That sort of second half of our sort of pitch. So this game is it's called Dice Adventure. We're doing it in collaboration with Georgia Tech. And the way the game works is, I'm just going to do practice mode right now, so our goal here is to study human AI teaming, or human machine teaming. And the way this game is built is there are three characters. There's a dwarf, there's a giant, and there's a human. And they're working together to essentially play this dungeon crawler game. And some of the challenges they have to overcome is you can see different characters have different ability to see the board. They have different abilities to fight these monsters. So for example, the human is better at fighting monsters. The dwarf is better at breaking or at diffusing traps. The giant's better at breaking rocks, stuff like that. And ultimately they have to reach their little shrine things to grab these magic talismans and then get to the tower. And that's kind of a basic puzzle. But the way that we built this game is any one of these characters could be played by a human or it could be played by an AI. And what we're going to be doing is we're actually running a competition right now as part of the conference on games, if anybody's interested, where you can sign up to participate either as a human player or an AI developer. Right now, we're in the AI developer phase, so there's builds of the game that are available if you want to build an AI to play against them and kind of figure out how to get an AI working. But then in the summer, we're going to run a sort of matchmaking competition phase where people that are signed up to play can join this game. They'll get randomly match made with either other humans or AIs. and they will play through this game, and we will capture their performance. And the highest performing hybrid team will win. So all human teams can't win, all agent teams can't win. The goal here is hybrid performance between humans and AIs. And all of that's already been solved. We figured out the matchmaker. There's a kind of a gnarly boot up process to this game to get AIs and humans and all that stuff to work. That all works. We figured it out last year. We kind of stumbled our way through a first round of this competition. We're running it for the second time this year. And then something I would love to figure out how to do, we have our own logging schema. We figured out how to record data and all that. But it seems like a really natural fit to connect this up to something like open game data, have a resource like this just sitting available on itch like this, and collecting this data sort of passively, and how people approach working with AIs or how AIs approach this problem. And we can start to look at people's different sort of strategic choices. In a broader context, we're actually building several of these games. This is just our most developed and publicly available one. We have 3 others in the works. And I would love to figure out a way to have these things sort of generally compatible with the open game data infrastructure so we can start to collect data on human AI collaboration in these sort of interesting task domains. And here is the problem I ran into when I started trying to integrate the open game data logger into our system. Is the open game data logger, as it's currently designed for all of the games at Field Day and some others, doesn't understand multiplayer. So the problem here is there are 3 players here, and it gets more complicated than just there are 3 players. You can play this game locally. So this is kind of what the local mode looks like. Normally, you wouldn't be able to switch between characters. This is kind of like the practice mode, and I'm just using it to show off the game. So all 3 of these characters are controlled by one user in a local context. But in the actual competition mode, it's a network game. So there's 3 separate instances of the game running, but they're running in the same session. So there's 3 different users worth of data going through a single session. And then the extra nuance is the AIs are always playing local mode, essentially. So if you're playing one human with 2 AIs, the 2 AIs are sharing an instance of the game to sort of cut down on processing. So there's both local multiplayer and network multiplayer, and both can happen simultaneously within an actual instance of play. And the existing open game data logger infrastructure does not understand anything like that. And so trying to figure out the best way to approach this has been kind of something I've been struggling with. And I can talk about some of the schemas we've played around with that I'm not even necessarily super happy with, but the decisions we made about how the game would work initially. And then we could maybe get into the specific open game data of it all if people are interested. Let me find a window off screen. Yeah, if anybody has any particular questions about the game as it exists or how it works.
Yeah. So kind of just on the technical end of things, when you mention each networked player running a different instance of the game, am I understanding right then that there isn't like a central server that's taking all of the inputs and maintaining sort of one world state? There's some kind of synchronization happening between each player as other players.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a master client setup. So
Sure.
one of the clients in the multiplayer game is the master client.
Okay.
It's usually the one that was there first, basically.
Sure.
And they
Sure.
function like a server.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
But there is no central authoritative server. It's a peer-to-peer where one
Okay.
is treated like a server.
Yep.
And at least for the competition mode, we can guarantee that master client is a human player. The AI always gets loaded second. So the
Sure.
AI is always a sub-client. That might change for some of our other games.
Yep.
One of our other games, we're kind of building more of an actual authoritative server setup because it's a much more complicated sort of life sim type of thing, and that needs to be on a beefier server that doesn't have to worry about WebGL rendering.
Sure. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Certainly. find it interesting to have a look through. Well, and I guess the other question would be, I know at least around field day, we tend to use uh the word schema to mean like five different things, which we really ought to be better about. Um, when you're talking about schemas for events, is that like set of events and event specific stuff, or is that also including like a bigger picture cross event, general part of the schema?
So this is my logging spec.
Okay.
Uh, Flagrantly stole this event idea concept after seeing PBS kids talk about it.
Hmm.
So thanks for that. um,
Well, that's
our
happy. Yes, use
yeah.
my system.
Our numerical ranges probably aren't the same, so that's a thing to maybe eventually figure out how to unify on. But I basically kind of copied it to be sort of like HTTP spec, and that's actually become even more so for our future games. Um, and I can actually share this link if people are interested. Yeah, so the way this works is the sort of the 1000s are kind of progression events. So it's like session start, game start, level start, round start, phase start. It's kind of like the full hierarchy of the game. And I'm kind of playing with like 1000 is start, 1001 is end, 110 or 1010 is start, 1011 is end. Like they have a nice sort of parallelism to them. So the 1000s, so the session starts come out of everybody. So that's as soon as anybody starts the game. You saw there was that consent form when I loaded the game up. As soon as I hit play anonymous, I got a random ID and that session start got fired. You can also if you participate in the competition, you get an ID and you have to enter it, and then you hit go. And as soon as that happens, we get an ID and that starts. Start game is when the match itself began. So that's when this scene loaded. And that is kind of our clapboard event where you see we get the user ID and the session ID of all the characters. So that's the event that we can use to sync everybody up if we need to. Because session is like user specific, game is actually like the full matches start. And then from then on, and this is one of those decisions that I'm not sure I would make again and would maybe question. All these other 1000 events will only come from the master client. So anything that the sort of the main server game is doing. These 2000 events, these are mostly like random matchmaking management type things. These are kind of meant, so it's meant to be like 1000s is progression, 2000s is stuff that's sort of out of game, and then stuff later is in-game stuff. So this is like you joined a queue, you left a queue. We have a system where you get essentially randomly assigned to whether or not you're supposed to be in a single human or a two human game. And it's possible that if there's not enough people to matchmake, you'll fall back to a single human game, stuff like that. So we want to track things like that so we know what mode you're playing. Are you playing the mode you were assigned, or are you doing a fallback? That's what most of these are for. The 3000 events are sort of player actions. These are things players can take. In this game, it's mostly stuff like you can plan actions to take in a turn, and then you can submit stuff like that. So it's essentially these button clicks are 3000 events. And if you actually finish and submit them all, they all take their actions. And then these combats can happen. They can be initiated either by a monster. So this is on the monster moving phase. They moved into us and initiated combat. You can also attack them. Same system either way. And then you can also do these pinnings. So you can drop these little pings in the environment. It's another kind of action you can take. So those are all 3000. These are sent by every client individually, because I wanted to make sure timestamps are in the scope of the user. So every individual client is sending these separately. The 4000 events are sort of game response or sort of game actions. So they're either what the game is going to be doing in response to stuff, or we don't actually use this tick one, but we're going to be using it a lot in the future. It's essentially like a state heartbeat. These only come from the master client.
Yeah.
So if you're following along, what that implies is to have full understanding of an individual session of this game, you have to pull 3 separate log traces that have different session IDs and sync them up. Because you won't get separate users action contexts without their 3,000 events. And then if you're looking at one of the sub-client's actions, you won't get the context of what's going on, the full context of what's going on in the game unless you have the master client's 4,000 events. This has been a bit of a headache on our back end to figure out what's going on. We are saved somewhat in the context of this particular game being turn-based. So the timing doesn't really matter that much. But we have another game we're working on where it's like Lovers in a Dangerous Space-Time. If you've ever played that game where you are collaboratively controlling a spaceship, but no one gets to control all the different degrees of freedom of motion.
Oh,
that one is in real-time space physics. So that one is going to be a huge nightmare for merging some of this stuff together. So we're sort of trying to solve this problem now before it becomes a big problem later. And then we have some of these other ones down here, the 5,000 events. This is for the AI stuff. So anytime an AI sends an action to the game, we log it separately. So these are essentially just parroting the AI protocol. And then I just kind of created 6,000s as like some random kind of errors and stuff. There aren't too many of these, but anytime where the game fails for some unforeseen reason, or foreseen reason. In the case of this one. Yeah, so that's kind of how our schema works. And we actually did collect data using this over the past competition, but we haven't done much with that data, partly because of the merging, syncing stuff is so hard to do.
Yeah.
A thing we have changed that wasn't in the original data collection, but is now, is when you launch a game, so this start game, there's a game ID. This game ID now appears in every message. So it's at least one column less needing to worry about merging stuff. So now this will be shared by every client in the same game. So that at least helps with some of the merging headache. Because otherwise you would have had to pull this message, deconstruct this like nested JSON object, use it to pull 3 other sessions, and it was an ETL nightmare. So we have at least the game ID now helps us. But it's still, there are sort of 3 separate traces going on. Or rather, yeah, there's 3 separate traces all the time. And the thing that we do is the way that we log the AIs, even though they use the same instance of the game, there's a system in there where they're assigned separate session IDs. So they essentially in the logs will look like completely separate entities, even though they're using the same build of the game. Because ultimately, some of the analysis we'd want to do with these traces is like, we don't necessarily want to assume like character 1 is always an AI or something. Like we don't really care for some kinds of analysis, and sometimes we do. So we would want to make it always look sort of parallel. And then beyond that, we have kind of a common actor object. Context is essentially state. I'm thinking of renaming it. But things that are kind of parallel to the schema that OpenGame did already uses, with I think the one extra nuance here being an actor tag. Because it's inherently a multi-agent game, you need something to tell us who is acting.
Sure. And then so here you've got true false for context. Is that just
that's just whether or not it's included? It's actually a big gnarly JSON object, but it's always the same.
Sure.
It's always generated using the same sort of state structure.
Okay,
for
across all event types, and then the true false is just whether it's included when you specifically go to download it. Is that
whether it's included in the actual send of the message?
I see.
Otherwise, it'll be
okay. Got it. So so it's an all or nothing thing. Each event either has a context with the same structure as every other event, or it has nothing at all.
I think it'll always have a context tag, and it just will have an empty dictionary if it's not relevant.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess what I'm getting at is, so in that case, either an empty dictionary or a dictionary that is the same structure across all. Okay, okay.
And also and this is, I think, roughly what the context looks like. And then like there's also your typical like there's a timestamp in there.
Yep.
Some other stuff like that. That's
Yeah.
not tagged here.
So now now that we've sort of got the like, here's what exists, would it be more helpful to talk through what you've done so far and like ways to tweak it? Or is it even at the point where it would be more beneficial to sort of collaboratively talk about what would be a good way to translate this into more of the open game data philosophy? Like I don't have a great sense of like how far along that process is.
Right. So I can even, if you want to get like real in the weeds, I can show you. I've followed the steps to actually bring in the open game data logger.
Sure, sure.
So I set that up in my code here.
Yep.
But then I kind of ran into a problem that the way the open game data logger script is written, and this is me like looking at your decompiled binary, is that the individual logger is assigned a user ID when you construct it. And then it is a static instance. So if I had multiple users in a local single instance of the game, I can't change that.
Yep. Yep. Okay.
So I can only do this if all three clients of the game are separate. But if they're ever being shared, I can't use it.
Yeah.
And then there was also when I'm actually sending the message itself, currently what I'm doing, and I suppose we could test this. I could literally launch like my editor version and see what comes out on the open game data side. Is right now I'm being kind of lazy and I'm just forwarding you my schema, which will probably choke some of the open game data processors. My schema looks like this. So we could try that if you want, and we could like super in the weeds do that. But there's at least one level of like, I don't know how I could do a local multiplayer where I want to treat separate clients as separate with the way the literal code is written. But but there's also like, what should it be, I guess, is another question.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would lean towards would probably be the discussion of like what's a good way to think about adapting what you have into the open game data world, and by extension, in what ways would that open game data philosophy need to expand to support the things that you're trying to do? I think, in the weeds, like the actual C# side of things is not something that I actually have ever done myself. I've got a good sense of what it's accomplishing because I work with the engineers who directly work with it. I'll mention like a couple things. First of all, you mentioned like the decompiled binary. We do have a GitHub for this if that makes
I
things
don't think it's
easier.
really that different. It'll be this same code. I think there's maybe a couple extra decorators that got put in here, but this is just when this is just when I go here and say.
And then, I mean, the other thing is
implementation will show me.
Yeah. So, and I think that is under the Open Game Data GitHub org. We're always like, anytime that there's, some like a roadblock you run into, I think all those repositories are set up where anybody can just pop in and, file an issue. And that can be a useful way to at least make us aware of what things you've run into. So like anytime that we're talking about this stuff, I'm thinking in my head about, okay, how many different issues should I create just to sort of keep track of these? So those will be like the couple things that I'll mention just initially in general. Like that's a great way to whenever you're working with the tooling that we've built and distributed from field day. That's a great way to sort of um, turn around and tell us, okay, here's how things need to change. Or at least here's how I'd like things to change, and then we can have a discussion. So coming back to the schema, a couple like one question I had. So you mentioned the like 5,000 range of events for when the AI agents make moves.
Yeah.
Given that you've got actor distinguishing between a player and an agent, was there an additional reason that the AI events needed to be separate?
So the way this system works, so this HMT, we have the game set up, and this is another separate library we've been working on across all these games, is essentially a system that boots up and exposes WebSockets for AIs to subscribe to and take actions in the game.
Uh-huh.
This is essentially a straight dump of calls to that API.
Sure.
So this is honestly more like an internal debugging kind of code rather than like you'll get this interface call with like move up or whatever, plus whatever all the other crap that would be part of that call. And then you would also get the action call for moving. They'd both appear.
Yep.
So this one is just literally what was sent to the API,
Sure.
straight quoted because we want to see
Yep.
it.
And then the corresponding 3,000 also
will
get
also happen. Yeah.
logged. Okay. Okay.
So one
Yeah.
is like game framed and one is API framed, and I just wanted both.
Yep.
I'm always in favor of recording way more data than I'm going to need.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Storage is cheap and SQL is easy to use.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So the thing that came up in our other discussion was we spent a bit of time, I think, getting into like, oh man, we really need like a glossary as like a way to keep track of which words we use to mean which things. But one of the things that we expect would be helpful in addition to the open game data concepts of session ID and user ID, having some concept of instance ID that could be, unique to
So it's kind of like my game
anytime
ID
there's a
here.
master instance of the game, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of like my game ID here.
Yeah.
Which I have thought about in retrospect, like game ID is a terrible name for that.
Sure. Currently we use the word game ID to refer to the name of the
Right.
game itself. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
something
And then we don't have an app ID concept
Sure.
in the schema yet because we haven't had to deal with that problem.
Sure.
I think like kind of where I was going with this was like because I was originally pitching or thinking of pitching is like, is there a bigger schema here? And so some of the idea was like kind of following game set match
Sure.
kind of thing. And they'd be like nested within each other.
Yeah.
But how much we want to enforce that nesting, I don't know.
Yeah. Because then that sounds pretty consistent with the framing that came to mind when we were discussing the other time, where to address that issue of like how like which parts of the data do you need to pull to get the information for one player or whatever, that does create sort of a natural hierarchy of everything that you would need to understand the game that occurred would be under that common instance ID. Um, and then sort of individual players and individual AI agents hypothetically get their own user IDs. And then session ID, allows you to account for, I'm not sure if this game allows people to sort of freely drop in and out.
This one doesn't, but future games will.
Sure. Because I mean, I guess at the end of the day, you can never stop someone from dropping out, but yeah,
Right.
can they join back up again? Allows you to account for individual, am I in, am I out, am I back?
And especially multiple sessions across the same user. I think that's the
Yeah.
point of a session ID.
Yeah. Um, And so it kind of sounds to me like that would be one specific place for the open game data thing to adjust would be, even if you're like an instance ID is potentially even beneficial for um single player games where one person might play the same game a couple of times, and you might want to know things about the player across all the play they did. You might want to know about an individual gameplay session, but you might want to know, you might want to have data organized according to a playthrough. Um, that seems like a natural sort of, there's a thing that's missing. Um, looking at the, I think the other thing that you highlighted as like a tricky fit was figuring out, um, exactly who is logging what parts of the
Mhm.
data. Um, and that's interesting because that piece of it, like until you brought up the like finish, level start thing, I hadn't really stopped to think too much about that. Does it make more sense for everyone who hops from one level to the next to individually, redundantly log that information? Uh, I think, I think that my bias would be towards um, let let each actor, I guess, log the things that they do, which would include like starting a new level or starting a new round, especially because those are just useful markers if you're looking at one player's trace.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that that's the direction that, if this was something that we were working through, you and Dave and I in the field day process, I think that's the direction we'd go.
So you'd say like just have everybody record the context.
Yeah, like those contextual, like, or those like progression events.
Yeah,
We know that everyone sort of progresses together by nature of how the game's designed,
right.
but I think like the philosophy is usually as long as an event isn't happening too frequently, we're usually not too worried about having something that seems maybe a little bit redundant, like a handful of players all log the same event within, their trace.
Mhm.
Um,
And then if you're merging the macro session together, you would essentially just drop the extra tags or something.
yeah, like, and by macro session, we're talking like at that instance level of
Yeah,
everybody together.
because there'll
Yeah,
be
I mean,
slightly different timing, because the time is always egocentric time, because that's a whole another annoying thing about network games is time frame of reference sucks.
yeah.
And again, in this particular game, it doesn't matter a whole lot because like things are done on the order of a couple seconds. And
Uh-huh.
but we've even noticed, like you might have seen, there's this timer up here. This is different for everybody. It can be off by up to 10 seconds.
Okay, sure.
Uh,
Sure. Yep. And I
um,
mean, I think that is like that's useful to know and useful to capture too, right? To like the knowledge that if you've got multiple different people playing at the same time, timing is a little bit different, even on the things that are represented as the same
mhm,
or simultaneous. So I think yeah, the more that we talk about it, the more sense that it makes that at that sort of individual player level, like their actions and experience in terms of progression, in terms of actions taken, would be logged individually. And yeah, when you put it all together, you know that there's three different copies of this event because three different players moved on to a new level. Um, and
Yeah.
then I think, when you,
Jesse?
you go to, and oh, sorry, I heard
So
Jesse read something
I
down.
was just gonna say that was my reaction too, is that like, is there a problem with not having, or like with, each player logging what happened to them, because I think that's our sort of philosophy, is to capture what each player was experiencing. And like, we don't have games where people can be like, we have two players on the same device, but they're playing the same thing, not,
Right.
you know. But our general approach is capture what the player is experiencing. So even though it would be redundant, we would want to do that. And then, like you're saying, if you put it all together, it's still interesting to see, like, it would be good to capture those time differences to see if that is something that is causing issues in player behavior. But then potentially you could still designate like one player that's the main person that, oh, just, you know, when you put everything together, just follow this person or something, or, you know, however that's appropriate according to the events.
Yeah, do something like, I know a thing that's been done before with the precursor to Quick Red Fox, the early Bromp technique stuff with Ryan Baker, is the way that they did logging for that, because it was again an app, and then you had like a tutoring system, and they came up with a schema that got like buried down in extra fields of the CTAT schema. Was everybody would ping a authoritative time server, like the Naval Observatory or whatever, and then you'd all print your delta to the authoritative time server, and then you would use that to sync stuff up. We could take a strategy like that in something like this. And so I think something that'd be interesting to think about for some of these sort of strategic schema ideas for like open game data long term is all of these could be optional fields where like the internal system like assumes something. So like I actually think instance ID is not that useful outside of a multiplayer context, because you already have session ID and it's going to be kind of the same thing for a single player. And so if instance ID is missing, you just assume it's constant. Or similar for actor ID. Though I do think we might want to consider actor ID generally, because actor here is not necessarily meant to be player. Like you can see down here for some of these, it's like when the monsters take actions.
Yep.
Like to some extent, every game is a multi-agent system where one of the agents is the game system. And so having an actor ID can be useful generally, but if it's not there, you could just assume it's the player. And that's how it's recorded.
Yeah, and that separate idea of actor, you know, as opposed to like user ID that's uniquely identifying a user or whatever, like the way that actor here is somewhat being used as a like actor type.
Kind of, yeah.
It's sort of
character here is when it's in brackets, that's literally like the character name.
yeah. So like it's
it matters more when you get into the game itself. When you're outside the game, it's just always like system or whatever. But
yeah. But that idea of having which I guess you've already on some level done with those event ID numbers, which I think honestly is the strongest argument I've seen so far in favor of using like the numeric IDs, is the way that you're defining ranges, and that the range itself tells you what type of actor.
Yeah, to some extent, it could just make an assumption based on the range.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question because the way that we use our event IDs is that it is like all 2000 level events are like things that happen by the system. And for us, it's all 4000 level events are things that happen by the user. And then I think in this case, we would have like a, you know, 7000 level event that is like something that another player did. And so then we would like, you know, if it was a 2-player game, you'd have what did player 2 do and logged as a 7000 event for player A and vice versa, so that you could then see like what was this person, like you'd capture that full experience, but also labeled differently for each person.
That's interesting. Yeah, so like we could have 3000s is like egocentric actions. 4000s would be non-egocentric actions by other players. But like We need to figure out the ranges and all agree on them at some point, but something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Right.
That's
And we
interesting
have
to think
like,
about.
oh, this power up appeared or whatever. That's like
Right.
a system, something or other. That's like a 5,000 event for us, which is different from our 2,000 level events, which are things like round start,
Got
round
it.
stop. Like that's just marking phases of the game
Mhm.
versus like an actual system action of something appeared or you collected this
Sure.
sticker or this character started talking, whatever.
Sure. Um,
The other
10. It's half a what type of event, but also system, like or who the actor is. That's what I'm trying to say.
right. Yeah.
yeah, and to be able to just say, yep, this range of actions or this range of events are player action, whatever. Like I immediately think of sort of timekeeping, like in terms of like feature extraction. Like when we go to try and say just how long did someone play, you say, oh well, take the last event's timestamp minus the first event's timestamp, and that's how long they played. And then as
Yeah.
soon as you do that, it's like, oh well, this is useless because a bunch of players just left their computer set. Okay, so now we got to figure out how long they spent actually doing stuff. But
Yeah,
then you get a game that has a busy background system, like an RTS
Yeah.
that's just constantly spitting events out. So then it never looks like they were doing nothing. So now we've got to look at just the events the players did. And so far, we've always just operated under the every event gets a human readable name because human readability is good. But that makes it really hard to then go back and like actually pick out.
yes. We calculate active time between when was there the first 4,000 level event and the last 4,000 level event, and then and some other
Mhm.
things. So remove time between some things. But because like we
Yeah.
have lots of games with long instruction or video of like kids are watching something happen. And so we're like, okay, well, like they were active, but they weren't, we don't know that they were paying attention in our case. So we just like throw that time out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. A thing we've never had to put in is pause. You can't
Oh,
pause any of our games. All our games run constantly. But yeah, that's one that would be like if it was just a tag for pause and unpause, and you could just like you could remove explicit idle time really quickly. Yeah, that would be super useful. None of our games work that way right now because they're constantly running. Partly because it's a competition and everything, and so like we did consider a system that like if you idle for too long, particularly thinking about if somebody built a bad AI that doesn't know what to do for anything, it doesn't take any actions. We just cut the game if you idle for too long. Like kick everybody back to the lobby and and reload. Stuff like that. But the next game we're working on, or one we're kind of spooling up, is an RTS essentially,
sure.
where stuff will be constantly in motion, but it'll almost always be this 4,000 event for us, which will be super easy to filter out and ignore because it's just the system will be ticking. And if you want to learn about actual action time or whatever from a player, then just ignore all the ticks. Because
Really hurting my brain. Like I'm so like I only care about 4,000 level events
sure,
because
yeah,
that's what my users are doing. It's fine. It's just like what?
yeah, we can remap at some point.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of the egocentric and other player action or other actor action. And then if I did have that, I probably would put an actor label on those
Yep.
because it's essentially me or not me and not system.
Yeah.
Because particularly for our games, that RTS one, the structure behind that one, you're keeping track of a farm and there's a bunch of bots, and essentially every single bot could be controlled by a separate player or AI. So like it is a N player game. It's not a 2 player or 4 player game. It's like an unbounded number of possible entities could be controlling stuff. So we can't just commit to like 4,000 is for player 2, 5,000 is for player 3, whatever.
Right. Right.
We need a system that is uncommitted to number of players. And in that context, we would probably need some way to express the actor, but it could be just for that particular tranche. Or similarly, like what I was saying is like you could include the actor if you wanted, but if it's not there, given the code, we assume it's X like that. having stuff like that within the processing pipelines might be useful.
Yeah, and we already have some of that to some extent where, yeah, user ID, for example, is already optional because not every game explicitly tracks its own user IDs. Various other fields are, yeah, definitely
Yeah. And
very
just
much
having
optional.
like ways when you're pulling it out of the database to just like assume you fill something in that makes sense given context so that downstream processors don't freak out when
Yeah,
it's missing.
yeah.
Um,
So, and I was curious about that tick event because that was another
yeah.
category of things that came up in the prior discussion where we've done um things sort of like that before. And I'm curious like what your version of a tick event is.
So you can see in my notes there, this is me future proofing. We don't actually use it in this game,
Okay,
but I
sure.
wanted to reserve the 4,000 number
I see. I
because I
see.
knew it was going to be useful.
Okay.
So there's kind of an additional implied schema here that I don't know if I'll keep to, but
Uh-huh.
essentially the hundreds digit would be used for our games. So there's like the type, and then 0 in theory should be events that would work across all of our games. 100s would be for this Dice Adventure, which is game 1.
Yeah.
200s of views. I don't know if I want to keep to that. That kind of like it limits the namespace a lot, and we can only build 10 games. Then we got to come up with a new schema. but but that was the original plan. So anything
Uh-huh.
that's not a one, there's anything that's less than a 100
Uh-huh.
is probably something that could rebalancing the numbers be useful generally to an open game data kind of context. At least that's the idea. So
Yep.
that's why I think tick is like a very foundational game action or a game
Yeah.
system action. And for me, this was just going to be state. It's just essentially as a heartbeat of state.
Uh-huh.
And coming mostly from my sense of building replayers, it's essentially the keyframe that you would delta off of with actions
Okay.
is the
Sure.
main
Sure.
thing I was thinking. But I send state with almost all my actions anyway, because that's just how I always do things. So
Yeah.
it's probably going to be uh, hefty. Another thing that we've thought about or that we do sometimes is we have lots of different levels and details to which we encode state. So
Mhm.
like the state that gets sent to the AIs to take actions is much smaller than the state that ends up in the actual log.
Uh-huh.
Because the log is like, it's like I want literally everything that I could reconstruct the game entirely. Whereas the one that we send to the AIs is like, here's what you can see, take an action. And so tick would probably be like the most expressive version of the state, whereas other actions might get a smaller version of it.
Sure. So the thing that we've found with the couple of times and the couple of ways that we've done something like a tick is in VR we do something like a tick that is actually delivering the collection of per frame viewport and viewport position and orientation and then your hands position and orientation because that's something that is not otherwise captured by the system, but is very, very fundamental to the user experience. And like that is the only version of tick that we've implemented and then actually practically used.
Mm-hmm.
The other and so like there was one use case of like, yep, there's no way to get that what you get from that viewport data, there's no way to get that from just the individual actions and events that are sort of concrete in-game things happening. I could imagine a world where, you do like a first person shooter or whatever, and you do something similar just for viewport. Most of our games though are, point and click kind of things.
Yeah.
Um, The other place where we did a tick that was a game state tick, like what you've talked about, was with Lakeland. And like, I don't think we've ever used that tick data to do anything. Now, we didn't necessarily try to set up a replay system for that. We did set up, and do replay for VR. The thing that comes to mind would be sort of a question of like, you talk about the game state tick as the keyframe to build from to build out with your actions for the following, frames worth of state. Just in terms of like practical experience, if you don't do that, do you find that you like run into issues with getting sort of out of sync with the actual gameplay? Like, I'm just curious. Um, our philosophy has leaned towards, okay, if we're capturing all the actions, all the events, then we can reconstruct everything that happens and not need that synchronization point, and then we haven't needed ticks for anything else. I'm just curious in practice, like if you've got more, knowledge and experience to add to that.
Yeah. So the origin of my state action pair replay system goes all the way back to my thesis, which was a physics game where kids would build block towers called rumble blocks. And then we would literally shake the ground, like move the rigid body of the ground around, and if the tower fell down. So like feedback was the physics engine. Unity's physics engine, PhysX, is documented to not be deterministic based on hardware. It runs on the
Sure.
graphics card. And so the actions I had was players would pick block, drop block, and then stuff would happen.
Yeah,
And I never trusted that.
sure.
So that's why I always had state. And so like the way my replayer used to work for that was I drop the block, I'd let the physics engine run for an in-game 10 seconds to see what would happen. Then I would interrupt gameplay run, or I'd interrupt the engine, run whatever calculations I want, spit a thing out, and then reset the state to the next action, do it again.
Yep.
So essentially, if you had to do like, what's going to happen with this action, and do we want to take a window and all that kind of stuff. Now for a game that is deterministic, so we know this game is deterministic. We know probably lots of your other games are deterministic. If they're really not using physics, or essentially if they're not using fixed update, might be a good Unity way to frame it. You probably don't need state.
Sure.
Or another thing that you can do, there's another nice thing that was convenient about having state action replay, is it's infinitely indexable. I can jump into that replay anywhere because I have this.
Oh, sure. Yep.
Whereas if I only have the beginning, you have to interpolate everything to get the context. So having a keyframe can be useful at some heart rate to know I can jump in here and then run forward. And so if you have state and action on everything, you can jump in anywhere. Otherwise, you need to be like find closest keyframe, interpolate forward. If you're doing replay stuff. So that's kind of how I approach these kinds of things. But with this game and with lots of our other games, we probably don't need it. But maybe there's an argument to be had for, rather than this tick being like 4,000 code for me, or what is it, 2,000 code for Jesse, or whatever. Maybe it's like the 7,000 or 8,000 code for various kinds of tick. Like maybe it's a state tick, maybe it's an input state tick, maybe it's a VR tick or whatever. Because there's a couple different ways to do replay. I always did state action interpolation. Some people do input buffer reconstruction. And so you replay the input buffer and you assume the game will act the same every time. You could just do pure state interpolation without actions. So that's how a lot of real-time strategies record their replays, is they don't actually have the actions in there. They're just like, here's the state every time, and the thing is for changing in between. And so we could just have like a whole sort of reserved space for like regular heartbeat state tracking of various kinds. And then each of those kind of implies slightly different semantics about what assumptions you'd want to make about it in terms of how a processor would use it down the line. So I am noticing we are at time, so I want to be conscious for people who might need to go somewhere. But this is always fun to get in super, super deep weeds about log encoding.
Yeah,
Um,
it's really helpful for, yeah, just thinking more about some of the cases that we haven't seen in the field day world.
yeah, I'm really interested to see. We haven't started putting logging into that uh, real-time strategy type game yet. That's going to be a fun one. Getting that thing to run at all is kind of interesting. The way that we set this whole thing up to like launch the AIs and everything is like multi asynchronous work sucks. But it works. It took a while, but it works.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I'll do coming out of this is I'll check in with our engineer about that static user ID issue that you ran into and sort of talk that through on our end of things. I don't know, like I don't necessarily have like the authority to say, hey, change this.
Right.
I'll definitely like chat, have that discussion, and hopefully that gets us some momentum towards sorting that out. Were there any other like, because I obviously this kind of turned into like me asking questions and us discussing them. Were there other like practical things where it was like, here's a limitation I face that I could use like some advice or discussion on?
Not that I've discovered yet, but I also haven't tried to actually send a log to open game data yet. I'm actually kind of
Right.
curious if I just started up my Unity editor version and fired some, because you gave me that app ID. And I could
Yeah,
try
that
it,
sounds right. I
and I'd be
think
kind of curious to see what it chokes on. Because right now I'm being lazy and just straight up sending my existing schema, and that's probably going to confuse it.
sure.
Um,
Well,
so I
under
can,
that event data field.
yeah, I
Yeah,
have all of the capacity to do otherwise. Thanks for coming, Jesse.
yeah, see, just see.
Um, I have the capacity to do otherwise. I have all the data there to reconstruct it in like the open game data style. I wanted to try it out first, but I might try that out later. I don't really have time right now.
Yeah. Um, and we used to have running that I don't think I should check in with our server guy. We had our little live socket spaced monitor setup that the last time I checked, like it didn't run, and then when I tried to, I couldn't remember the exact command to actually spin it up again on our server. Maybe a configuration changed or something like that that caused it to not spin up. But if and when we get that running again, basically it's just like a table that goes up to like 20 rows of the most recent events to come through for any given game ID. Um, and right now I mean, a combination of A, all of our data is meant to be public anyway, and B, security through obscurity kind of a thing of just like there's a little app on our server that nobody outside of Field Day knows about that has this socket
Data
stuff.
Data Shop has the same thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so you can just
Um,
literally watch raw data come in.
yeah.
Yeah, I might try this out later today, and I'll ping you if I just boot it up and have it fire some actions and see what happens.
Yeah, sounds good. Because then you should be able to see in the web editor, what kind of response you get. I think that our PHP endpoint might still be just echo on a successful insert query. I think it just echoes back what the query was,
Mm.
um, which is useful for debugging, not really best practices for the like body of your response, but I think that's what it's doing right now. And that's a convenient enough way to kind of see, oh yeah, this is what I intended to go there.
Sure.
Um, yeah, and if you're running anything, I can hop on and check error logs and stuff like that. We can see what specifically was breaking.
Cool.
All right,
Right.
great. Sounds good. We'll talk
See
to
ya.
you later.